Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time, and sorry for a little bit of the slow start here at the top of the hour. And thanks for joining the call. The exciting topic that we're going to talk about today is called AI in the IT environment. It's an exciting topic. We all know that there is a tremendous amount of work that is being done, a tremendous amount of exploration that's taking place in the IT world around artificial intelligence. And it's an exciting topic for me to share a few thoughts around. Before I get started, I'd like to share a little bit about Capstone IT Solutions and my role here as far as the business unit is concerned. So we are a strategic consulting-oriented organization with a tremendous amount of experience in cloud computing, application modernization. We do a tremendous amount of work around containers and Kubernetes within app modernization projects. We have a data management focus as well, a lot of work in databases, which would be expected given the amount of focus that we have in application modernization. And of course, you can't really address any of these areas without having some focus, of which we do in the world of DevOps. By way of background, we are the VMware Tanzu 2023 Partner of the Year. We have a very deep relationship with VMware, with Broadcom, and the Tanzu business unit. That business unit, for those who might not know, are focused on application modernization in this space. We are a Broadcom Expert Advantage partner as well, with a Expert Plus moniker that goes along with that. It's a new program that we're a part of, but we're very excited about the reach that brings. We are an AWS Select Partner and have done a lot of AWS cloud-related work. We're a Microsoft Azure partner, previously a Gold partner, and have also had the opportunity to implement a number of projects, application modernization projects in Microsoft Azure. And of course, we have certified consultants in all of the areas, including, for those who may not know, there at the bottom, that stands for Certified Kubernetes Administrator and Application Developer. By way of background, my name is Glenn Tyndall. I am the VP of our Solutions Business Unit here at Capstone IT, and I own profit and loss responsibility. I have an extensive infrastructure and application development history. And really, the world of containers prompted a lot of interest on my part going all the way back to 2015. The organization is really broken into three distinctive parts: a lot of application development, Spring, Java. We do a lot of .NET related work, and of course, again, DevOps there. On the platform side, we do a lot of work with VMware Cloud Foundation, the Tanzu business unit, and the Tanzu products as an overlay. And again, we've done cloud native work with AWS and with Microsoft Azure. On the data side, Postgres, SQL databases, vector databases is an area that we're now very actively involved in, and you'll hear more about that in just a couple of minutes. And then on the artificial intelligence side, we are already pursuing a GitHub Copilot development engagement and have leveraged that product as a way to enhance the developer experience and, more importantly, developer productivity. We've previously done machine learning work. We've run an Amazon Q trial and worked with Amazon with respect to some of that work specifically. And then we're also a VMware Tanzu AI design partner as well. So that's the background of the organization collective. For purposes of our discussion today, there are a number of references that I wanted to highlight. First of all, instead of really me trying to go through this conversation, sharing my humble opinions about technology, direction, things along those lines, I have found most frequently that webinars like this are beneficial when we use, or I use, other forms of technology as inputs and feeders. And as a result, I've looked extensively at Spring.io as a development experience, given the total number of applications that we've had the opportunity to work with in the Java world. I spent some time going through an very interesting article that you see here from McKinsey Consulting. And I would highly recommend, if you get the opportunity, to go take a read. I think it's a very interesting article. We have a partnership It's a new partnership with a company called Cerebral Blue. They have a product called NeuralSeek, and you'll see some slides that are going to come out of this. AWS, in fact, prior to this getting started on this call here in the last few minutes, I had an opportunity to read some additional information around vector data stores, and I wanted to go ahead and make a reference there. Beyond all of that, we have a number of additional considerations. Part of it is just the totality of the existing application estate, predominantly legacy, mostly on-premise, but a very, very large set of applications that are out there that companies are dependent upon. Application modernization trends, of which there are numerous, and we've seen a big push around containerization and microservices. Clearly, we all know there are cloud computing options that do exist as well. And then as we continue to watch the world of artificial intelligence evolve, we're seeing a fairly significant trend towards private, pretty much everything, private data, private AI, in some cases, private cloud computing as well. So those are the references that will be used to feed the conversation that we're talking about. In essence, the opportunity that we see in front of us is your data, your APIs, and how that correlates to generative AI. That really is the opportunity that we're all looking at. And again, this conversation is going to be focused on the world of IT and private data specifically with guardrails. We've all probably had the opportunity to work with, work with products like ChatGPT 3.0 and others. So we know there's a lot of generative AI work and foundational models that exist, but the focus for what we're talking about here is going to be your data, your APIs. Let's talk about the constituents that we commonly come across and some of the concerns that do exist for those constituents. Certainly, there's application development teams across the board. How do I integrate and leverage models? How can I build more intelligent apps and get those delivered to market? Do I have to go through the process of reskill? Where do I fit in the overall equation? There are there are performance team considerations in all of this as well. How do I ensure that my content is leveraged in a safe environment? How do I ensure that I have the right amount of privacy that's going to be factored into the equation here? And then on the right-hand side, model, subject matter expert, and data scientists. At the end of the day, everything that companies are going to leverage in the world of AI are predominantly going to be focused on their own personal data, their private data. So it's all about how do I improve accuracy of models? How do I enhance the models with my own enterprise data and continue that process in an iterative way to ensure the models always produce an optimal outcome? So these are the constituents. They're very common that we see, and each of them have their own agenda and their own concerns. Let's frame the challenge in the following way, and this is derived from the McKinsey article. Managing data remains one of the barriers to value creation from generative AI. And the next two data points are pretty interesting. 70% of top performers in a recent McKinsey survey said they've experienced difficulty integrating data into AI models, and there's multiple reasons why. The biggest of which is sufficient training data and data governance. It's a pretty big challenge that exists. Additively, McKinsey cites the fact that 63% of the respondents said that the output inaccuracy was the greatest risk that they saw for the organizational use of generative AI. And therefore, the world of artificial intelligence is always going to be data dependent, and in the world of private AI, especially so. Thus, the focus is going to be, how do I continually implement artificial intelligence and, more importantly, continually clean and refine my data and use that data as a way to train models such that the prompt output that comes from these models, in fact, provide high-quality results. Here's the target architecture. in its simplest form. For those who may not be aware, there are a wide variety of inputs and frankly outputs exist, from documents to audio, text, images, drawings. There's a litany of different kinds of technology that has emerged. There's even background art that's being produced for gaming output, as an example. So there are multiple generative AI models that exist, no longer just one or not just one. And as a result, the architecture in the long run, especially where larger companies are implementing artificial intelligence, is going to be multiple large language models or foundational models, no longer just one. So the focus will be along those lines. In the world of artificial intelligence, there is a very important concept, and that concept is called tokens. Tokens, as you see here, serve as the building blocks for how AI models work. And on input, models convert words to tokens. And then when you prompt and receive information coming back, the information coming out of vector databases, which we'll talk about here in just a bit, are also going to be presented back from tokens to words. Another couple of interesting statistics to consider. Generally, when you look at documents, a word correlates, or 75% of a word correlates to a token, which is sort of an interesting metric. Secondarily, tokens are the way that a lot of the large language models are priced. And to give you a feel, if you were to take the entire complete version of Shakespeare's works and convert that into tokens, it would be something like, mathematically, if I remember correctly, 1.2 million tokens. So tokens are a fundamental concept in artificial intelligence, and something that we're going to leverage as a concept as we progress through this presentation. Secondarily, a concept that we often hear referenced more so as an acronym, RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. A technique termed RAG has emerged to address the idea of incorporating relevant data for prompts. Think of it as loading your documents into a large language model and using those documents as a way, or data that comes from an organization, as a way to educate and train models. At a very high level, this, simply put, is ETL, extract, transform, and loading. So it's a very important part of the equation. We're going to talk about it here in just a little bit. Secondarily, vector databases, no longer only Postgres databases, are going to be an incredibly important part, and we'll talk about that at great length here in just a minute as well. So the concept in the world of retrieval augmented generation is all about ETL and the process therein. So let's talk about what that extract, transform, and load processing is all about. In essence, it's about splitting the documents that you have into parts while preserving semantical boundaries of the content. Think by paragraph or by table definition. The key is the fact that you should avoid splitting the documents in the middle of a paragraph or a table or something along those lines, trying to keep the semantical constructs together to the best of the ability. Once that ETL process has happened, you're going to also want to consider breaking the document into further parts, allowing you to have the smallest amount of token limit size that's going to be submitted into the documents, or into the large language models. I'm sorry. The key there is the fact that these large language models have token limits that they will allow you to submit your documents into. It's a window. And if you exceed that window, the document will be truncated at the token limit amount, thereby limiting or not taking full advantage of the totality of the documents that have been submitted into the large language model for purposes of training, and ultimately for purposes of prompt results. So it's important we understand it's decompose, decompose, decompose is the process that we're going to be looking for when we think about ETL and documentation. Additively, there's an important concept that is critical when we think about artificial intelligence and data management, and it's the idea of vector databases. Many people may not be quite as familiar with that vector databases. So in essence, what we're talking about here is the idea of taking context data, documentation that you see there on the very left, and beginning to break that into semantical elements. In this particular case, a cup of milk, a pinch of salt, all of this being in a broader cooking context. And then those semantical elements are broken then into vectors. Those vectors are ultimately what gets stored into the database. In turn, these numerical values are used to map elements in relation one to another in a multi-dimensional way, as you see there on the right-hand side. So as you ingest and input the documents in, what begins to occur is association, semantical associations begin to happen when the data is input into the vector databases. And as you see on the right-hand side, again, keeping in mind this might be in a cooking and food context, what will begin to emerge are relationships, dairy and cheese, oat milk and coconut milk, or strawberries and berries in general. Those critical associations are ultimately what allow artificial intelligence to work incredibly efficiently in returning associative data back to the user when you make your query prompts. So the concept of vector databases is a really important consideration in all of this. Now let's look at it, the entire process holistically. The top of this slide in a RAG context is the process of document ingestion, that ETL process that was mentioned just a little bit of time ago. And what we're going to be doing is we read the documents in and we start that process of decomposing those documents, and then we transform those into ever smaller chunks, which in turn, through that iterative process, are written to the vector store that you see right there in the left-hand middle part of the screen. From that vector data store, we see the typical chat requests that commonly happen. It would be a prompt, an individual asking a question or a series of questions, and in a couple of cases, maybe even additively adding in their own user data into the equation. But the combination of those two processes, the ingestion of that documentation, that document, plus the query are together used to make the prompt to the model. And ultimately what happens coming out of the model is the chat response itself. So the key at the top is feeding data, getting it into a vector database, refining, improving the quality of the data, and then additively ensuring that you continually leverage that data, query that data, provide governance around that data to provide your user community the best results that you possibly can. So now when we look at this holistically at scale, vector databases begin through this process, this RAG process that we saw in the previous slide. You can start to see what a vector database looks at extensively. So just before you look at the vector store concept, you can see a set of words. And if you note by color, and by term, there are associations that begin to emerge one together. And then the circles that I've added into the picture, whether it's the one on the right referencing Swaziland, or it's the one in the bottom of this square that you see in front of you here, the key is through this continual process of adding data into the vector database, associations become derived and the groupings of the information come together. So if we were to think about a world of private data, examples of this could be customer management documentation. It could be legal documentation that would all be derived and associated together. It could be financial reporting data that would be key. It could be things like inventory data. When we think about queries that say, hey, how much inventory might I have? Or what's my average time to ship a particular product? The world of artificial intelligence is helping through this relatively complicated process, putting together those associations that in turn, when prompted in a natural language-like fashion, provide clear, relevant, and associative results back to the user community. So that's the technological components at a very high level. The goal of this discussion today, and in the period of time that we have left, was not so much to try and work out all the engineering details that we have in flight, as much as to set a foundation of concepts that are critical for us to understand in the world of private data, private clouds. How does this work? How does the technology apply? How is it relevant to the business? So let's start looking at it through the lens of results. There are a number of key governance considerations when you think about the implementation of artificial intelligence. Certainly, there is going to be cost. As we mentioned earlier, tokens are what drive the economic expenses that are associated with artificial intelligence. And when you look at something like ChatGPT 3.0, there are billions of tokens that exist. It is a tremendously large environment there, and therefore the expense in totality is very, very high. So cost is going to be key. Secondarily, large language model or foundational model performance. How are my models performing? And you'll see a couple of slides that reference that in just a minute. The third is document sources. What documentation am I using? Is the quality of the documentation what I need, want, or desire? We're going to talk about prompt injection here in just a couple of minutes, so I'll hold on that. Scoring metrics, pretty interesting concept there. Personally identifiable information, or PII, is an area when we think about private data and governance therein. That's an example of where we don't want to provide personal information back when a user makes a prompt. So it's key that we've got the right sort of governance and guardrails around how the solution is being implemented so that we don't have that kind of issue arise. Answer provenance, something we'll talk about here in just a couple of minutes. And then hate, abuse, and profanity, or HAP, is another example that you do not, or we do not as an industry, want to have people with the ability to inject into these models and therefore train the models around hate, abuse, and profanity. So the dashboard that you see in front of you here is an example from a partner of ours, Cerebral Blue, that can be provided back to senior management or to those who are implementing the solution overall. How is the solution performing in a macro-like context? Scoring. And this begins to set the stage around how effective or efficient is my AI implementation at providing the results that the user would be looking for. And therefore, imagine when we go through the process of implementing an AI solution, whether it's a small project or at scale, we're going to want to have governance around and the ability to measure how effectively am I getting the results that you're looking for. In the top dashboard case, you can see the semantical match there is 6%. And you have a semantical analysis that comes back and says, here's the considerations why we're concerned, or the system is concerned, that you're not getting the quality results that you're looking for. That kind of information is key because it allows us to better understand types of questions that are not effective, types of data that may be queried, and how we may not have either quality data that's critical to the output that we're looking for, or more importantly, we may need more training around a particular area as well. The dashboard you see down at the bottom, you can see a semantical match of 100%. the high standard deviation of contributing resources or sources, I'm sorry, increased the overall score. So an example of how upon implementation of a solution overall that we could work with you around, it's an example of how we can provide guidance and feedback back. These kinds of areas, this kind of content, these kinds of prompts are not as good. These are other areas that are exceptionally well done. Prompt injection. So imagine in the world of governance, we want to provide extensive guardrails and management around the types of things that get prompted into a system and ensure that which is allowed for, we do so and do so well. But more importantly, those things that we do not want to have going into the system get eliminated. So there are dashboard mechanisms and there are solution capabilities that can be leveraged to put some thresholds in this, and the screen that you see in front of you gives you a feel of guidelines and thoughts that can be leveraged around the whole notion of prompt injection, testing, and testing output that would be critical for the business overall. So let me transition over to the bigger picture and some ideas to consider in all of this, because we're going to talk about how artificial intelligence and automation and house cleaning begin to come together in a much more automated yet reasonably complex way. So imagine you start your business approach around an assessment. What content do we have? What data do we want to leverage? Where does the data reside? How accessible is that data to what the business is trying to do, implement, or leverage? So that's a starting point, and that discovery process is key. And then imagine from that assessment and the data that comes from that, the business decides, I'm going to put a proof of concept together that's going to start the organization or the business collective down the AI project path. So I want to understand, what is a proof of concept? What's the right size? What's a relevant scope and size of output, such that if an investment is made and the results are delivered, we can look at those results through the goal of success and relevance to the business. Therefore, that proof of concept goal has to be very effectively defined and solidified. From there, again, the goal, the ultimate progression is going to be, now let's go talk about what data we want to use: legal data, marketing data, customer satisfaction data, financial data in some cases. And more importantly, where does that data reside? What systems does the data sit in? How reachable is the data? How easy is it to extract that data are all going to be key factors. The next thing we're going to go through is target. Which large language model or foundational model are we going to use? As mentioned previously or earlier in the call and conversation, there are multiple large language model options that are out there. OpenAI, while by far and away one of the most prevalent and most commonly known, OpenAI is not the only option that exists. There are multiple options, and each of those individual options are actually tailored to provide specific successful results in business corollary areas. So targeting the large language model to be used. The next thing is going to be, what are the governance considerations? Who's going to own the project? Who's going to define the guardrails, the rules, the implementation approach, and the strategy that's going to exist? And then moving along, the next part of consideration is the fact that there's a workflow. Let me pause and share what that concept of workflow means. Recognizing that the goal, as mentioned in the McKinsey article that I referenced at the very or earlier in this conversation, the key takeaway is the fact that that continual process of scrubbing, cleaning, improving data is absolutely critical to the outcome success of any artificial intelligence implementation. And as a result, while, as you've seen in the dashboards also presented, there are multiple ways of going through the process, seeing the results, and then iteratively beginning to go through an improvement, an enhancement to the data itself and the overall training of the models themselves. The key is the fact that as these AI projects become ever more expansive across the business, it's no longer going to be one data store, and therefore that process of cleaning and improvement and training becomes much more comprehensive. And therefore, the industry is beginning to recognize we can automate a lot of this work, and that automation is beginning to come in the form of AI agents. So imagine organizations that build particular agents, and you link those agents together, each of those agents owning an individual task, and that workflow orchestration iteratively goes through the process, improves the data, and then we reiterate again. We insert back into the process and run that loop such that over the course of a period of time, there's greater automation, there's continual improvement of the data itself, and therefore the results that you're going to get from your AI projects. And obviously, ultimately, what we want to be able to do is then deploy that solution or deploy that AI project, that proof of concept, that minimum viable product out to the user community and ultimately out to customers in the long run. So those are the typical iterative steps that we're seeing in an implementation. That workflow piece and those AI agents are going to be key in all of this. So let's talk about a few concepts. What is this whole notion of creating a task, an agent, or a bot? What does that look like? So imagine on the left-hand side, and in this particular case, or in this use case, the goal is going to be interaction with someone from a chat bot point of view. So you define what the communication steps would look like. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. This is where your particular use case subject matter experts are going to come into play. And on the right-hand side, what we're looking at are what are the types of prompting phrases that could be used in order to ensure that you get the measure of interaction that you are looking for from the customer. So it's an engineering process. It's really oriented around your customer, your user community, what you think that individual is wanting from the solution that's going to be provided. So you go through this iterative proof of concept discussion that's going to be key. From that, we now have the opportunity, and this is a number of workflow examples, but through systems, we can begin to create individual automation steps that are necessary, thereby creating those agents that were mentioned just a couple of slides ago. So what you're looking at are flows and progression of steps from top to bottom, and what we can provide or what's available through our partnership with Cerebral Blue, with VMware and Tanzu, AWS and others, are mechanisms that allow us to put together these types of prompts and much more of the orchestration. As you also see on the left-hand side, there are many other items that are in play. What are the large language models that we're going to use? What are the integration or API interfaces necessary to make database connections? What are some of the RAG tools that exist, guardrails, and a number of other things? A lot of this functionality is fundamental to the successful implementation of an at-scale artificial intelligence engagement or an artificial intelligence IT-oriented project. So it's a great dashboarding mechanism. In the end, the key is going to be mapping it out, organizing the structure, the progression of steps. Think in terms of the output results that you're going to be looking for. From that, we've now created, based on what you see on the left-hand side, this is that progression that we talked about just a couple of slides ago. And on the right-hand side, you can start to see what the level of interaction, in this case, it was a chatbot, but in what you start to see is the level of interaction when you deploy the chatbot solution. Is it giving me what I want? Is it addressing the needs effectively? Am I getting the proper level of feedback from the systems and more importantly, from the users so that the user can feel like we are providing the right level of customer service. But one example of many different ways this entire solution can be defined, the prompts created, guardrails implemented, and ultimately the solution deployed and available for the customer themselves. So with that, I'd like to close. First of all, thank you for attending the call. We very much appreciate your being here. We welcome the opportunity to work with you on your AI journey. We can leverage our partnership and our collective team experience working with you as you begin to think about your AI journey, and we would be very excited to do so. We can work with you. We can implement solutions for you. The best outcome we have found, however, tends to be something that's very collaborative. We offer support, think maintenance and support around the solutions themselves, and we can provide a managed services capability where we can not only help you plan and build the solution, but we, if necessary, can help you run if that's what you seek. And you can reach me, glenn.tyndall@capstone-s.com. So thank you, and I'll pause and see if we have any questions from the group. Okay, thank you very much.
I think there was a question in the chat. Do you see it, Glenn?
I do not see the question
Uh,
in the chat.
the question was, what scares you most about the coming AI wave?
There are a couple of things that we all need to be concerned about. The output that we get from artificial intelligence is only going to be as good as the information that has been provided to the models themselves, whether it's within a customer's environment or it's within, in a broader context, when you think about something as widely used as ChatGPT. Bad prompt injection, bad data that's provided will create bad results. And if we get to a point in time where we begin to become ever more dependent on artificial intelligence and the data isn't nearly as good as it needs to be, and therefore the results, we're going to have a bad outcome uh, for a significant investment. That would probably be the biggest consideration. I will add, however, that there have been multiple questions or multiple people who have asked me the question, is this good or is this bad for the IT industry? Is artificial intelligence good or bad for the IT industry? And I really do believe that artificial intelligence dramatically improves the productivity of all of us when used in the right circumstances and when we get the right output from the prompt itself, when we make the query and the right results that come back. Productivity is going to be really key for everything we do. How many times have we heard the notion of do more with less? Well, this is one of those first real opportunities where we, in fact, can do more with less. But the key is going to be the data, the quality of data, and we all will own that responsibility when we think about how these solutions get implemented. Any other questions, Philip, that I can answer?
There was one more. Where do you see enterprises that fail to consider AI in the next 12 months?
There are some really interesting metrics that are beginning to emerge around those that are embracing artificial intelligence projects now versus delaying. The metrics are starting to indicate that there are going to be impactful results that are going to significantly move a competitive advantage to the companies that are embracing artificial intelligence thoughtfully done and done sooner. So this is going to be a bit of a first mover advantage in many ways. And we in our solutions team have not stood aside and waited for things to emerge. We've already implemented a number of projects. We've already attended conferences. We've implemented, as I mentioned earlier, GitHub Copilot from a development point of view as a way to train and drive developer productivity. And frankly, the goal will ultimately be higher quality output of the code that we generate. So we do believe this is going to be key. For us as a business, we think it's going to be key for our customers as a business, and it will be a differentiator for those that move quickly. Other questions that I can answer?
No, that was it from the Q&A.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for attending the call. We appreciate you taking some time out with us. We're very excited about technically this direction and what we can bring to bear. We'd love to work with you in your projects. Reach out to me, reach out to us. We look forward to taking the next step. And thank you for attending again.